This podcast is for informational purposes only and does not constitute legal, tax, investment, financial, or other advice. It is not intended to cause or induce breach of an existing agency agreement.
This is the Victoria Real Estate Podcast. Hello and welcome to the Victoria Real Estate Podcast, where we discuss everything Victoria real estate. I'm Adrian Maclaren, and I'm a realtor on the CityNest team at Remax Camosun Oak Bay in Victoria. And I have no co-host today, as I'm over in Vancouver at the BC 2030, the Future of BC Real Estate Conference held by the Real Estate Institute of British Columbia. And on today's episode, we're actually joined by Jada Basi. Did I pronounce that right?
You got it. Yeah.
Nice.
Thanks for having me.
No worries. And Jada is a co-owner and principal of CitySpaces Consulting. And I had the pleasure of enjoying most of her speech today at the conference. I had to dip out at the end to kind of set up the podcasting. But yeah, Jada, thank you for joining me.
Happy to be here.
Yeah. Now, before we get started, Jada, I always like to give my listeners a little bit of like a personal summary background about so people can understand who they're listening to, where you came from, what you do. So would you mind by kind of starting by doing that?
Yeah, sure. Well, my background is I grew up in a small town in the Cariboo in the interior of BC. It's on the traditional territory of the Nasco Nation and the Taco Dene Nation. And it's a very forestry-based region. Until I was the age of 12, I thought everyone's dad worked at a mill.
Okay.
You either worked at a pulp mill, a sawmill, an MDF plant, or a pellet plant. And my dad worked as a machine tender for Cariboo Pulp and Paper until I was the age of 12. So my worldview really around industry, but I was also very interested in community. And when I was a kid, my dad, he used to bring home scrap pieces of pulp paper.
Okay.
And so
let me quickly interject. I actually don't know if I actually know what pulp is.
Pulp, imagine it to be a very sturdy, thick version of construction paper.
Okay.
All right. And he would bring sheets of this home, scrap pieces of it, and I'd cut it up like an arts and craft project.
Right.
And I'd build little buildings with it, and I would create these streets in my living room. And I think those were like early prototypes of mass timber buildings now, if we talk about mass timber. But I'm a community planner by training. So growing up in the interior, I went to UMBC in Prince George, and I focused on northern and rural community planning. And so I've been consultant for a couple of decades now, and most of my work is in northern and rural communities, and really supporting them on their long-range planning. And as it happens, that a lot of these northern rural communities are also resource-based communities, meaning they revolve around a single or a few different industries, be it lumber, pulp and paper, mining, things of that nature. And so I'm very much interested in the intersection between industry and community development. So that's a little bit about me.
Yeah, no, thank you. I appreciate that. So when I was listening to your talk, I got the kind of explanation, but for the listeners who may not know, you kind of mentioned company towns.
Yeah.
And, could you talk about what that is and why they were created?
Yeah, you bet. So in BC, there was a period of time when a lot of communities were purpose-built to support industries. And those communities were built by companies. And we used to call them company towns. Some of them looked a lot like work camps. So imagine tents and a fire pit that people are cooking over, and really they're harvesting logs, like right beside where they were sleeping. But some of those, I'd call them settlements and work camps, eventually became semi-permanent communities. And so, the companies that owned those communities, they mined and milled the resources around it. But there was a period of time when companies were looking to scale up, and the province of BC wanted to support them in that effort, but they had a heck of a hard time attracting labor and workers to be in these very rural, remote areas. Imagine just, no amenities, mainly men that worked in these areas, a lot of social issues, definitely no internet. We're talking, 1950s and 60s here. And so they were very limited the industries were very limited in scaling up because their communities didn't have the infrastructure. So that's what we call a company town. It's really a community that revolved around a single industry, and had a very interesting history with the province looking to intervene to transform those company towns into permanent communities.
Right. Okay. And now this is all related to the Instant Town Act of 1965. Yeah. And so can you talk a little bit about how this shaped, I guess, BC's development, or specifically regarding these towns?
Yeah. So in mid-century British Columbia, there was a bottleneck or a point when companies were looking to scale up, and the provincial government wanted to support them in that effort. So roughly between 1952 to the early 1970s, the social credit government wanted to support those industries, but they understood they needed to have an urban renewal program to create these communities where people actually wanted to live. There was a lot of legislation and acts and policy, but long story short, they did introduce a new legislation called the Instant Towns Act, and that was in 1965. And the intention with that was to transform or transition those communities that were owned by the companies and transition it into newly created incorporated municipalities. So transfer the infrastructure from the companies to those communities.
Right. Okay. Now, my understanding through listening to your talk today is that many of these towns, I guess, are now struggling with, mill closures and aging infrastructure. What can you talk a little bit about that, and I guess what is still standing today?
Yeah, you bet. Well, for some of the communities, when the companies built the towns and they built the infrastructure, they didn't necessarily think of longevity in mind. For example, some of the communities, if they were built around a mine, the mine had a lifespan of maybe 25, 30 years. So the infrastructure, water, sewer, etc., that was meant to last, 25, 30 years. But it's been 60 years since that time. So those local governments, those newly created municipalities, inherited that infrastructure, and they didn't stand the test of time. And so a lot of those communities are now struggling to update, replace that infrastructure. And part of the challenge is that, they're still small towns. They don't have many people that live there. They don't have a big tax base. And for most of them, the industries some of them are still there, but they're located outside the municipal jurisdiction, their boundaries. So the local governments are not able to generate any tax revenue.
Right.
So they rely quite a bit on grants to support them on their infrastructure.
Yeah. This might be a tough question to answer, but do you think that company towns, and I guess the Instant Town Acts of 1965, was a success or a mistake?
Oh, that's a good question. I feel neutral about it. There's lessons learned. I think it was the right move. If we think about what they were intending to do, they were trying to improve the living standards of where people were living in rural communities. Right. That was the intention. And also, they're trying to attract workers and families to these communities to support industry. If I look at just those things, I support that. Yes. And indeed, if I look at these rural remote communities today in 2025, we do need to support the community infrastructure to make them livable, people that live there. So the intention behind it, I think, was a good move. And also, I don't think we want to have companies solely owning a community anymore. Yeah. That could have been a helpful tool many years ago, but I think it was smart to move it. That said, there are some things that didn't work out very well. And one of them, like we talked about, is the infrastructure. I think that was a major blind spot when they created the instant towns. But also, they had big aspirations. They really thought that, hey, if we create permanent communities, more people are going to want to move here. We might diversify the economies. They actually thought and they planned that some of these communities would double in size that they are today. So they haven't really fulfilled their full potential of what they could have been. Now, you know what? It didn't entirely work out on the infrastructure side. So if we're looking at it at this point in time, we need to find, make a pivot, find new tools and mechanisms so we don't continue this road of just relying on grants.
Okay. Yeah. Now, we've mentioned infrastructure a couple times. What do you think the biggest challenge these communities face today? Is it housing? Is it infrastructure or economic diversification?
if I look at the full cohort of the instant towns, there's 14 altogether.
Yeah.
I would say all of the above.
All of the above.
All of the above. Yeah. Housing, it's water, it's sewer.
Yeah.
It's everything.
Yeah.
To be honest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, my thought would be like if we can, I thought like focusing on economic diversification first would maybe solve a little, because more money would be being invested into these towns. But that's a big challenge to overcome.
Well, I think economic diversification, I agree with you on that point. I think the other thing too is that some of the companies and industries that were there are no longer operating.
Yeah.
And what happened is there was no other industry that came into town to replace them. And so as a result, these communities that relied on just, one major employer and that, they did layoffs and now they have nothing to replace it. So diversification is one. But the other thing is having like new investment in major projects, which, we're seeing a new era of that and new announcements with LNG Canada Phase 2 and the Red Chris copper mine. Some of that is creating some excitement in terms of job creation, but it still isn't going to touch every community that's in this situation. Yeah, we have touched a lot on the negatives, that's going on, and I like that you brought up a positive point there. I guess following on that, why do you think these towns are so important to BC economy like today? Yeah. Well, BC as a whole, when we look at the revenue generated at the provincial level, even just looking at a GDP per capita and where that's being generated, a lot of that wealth is actually being generated out of these small and rural communities where these instant towns were and where their peers are. In terms of, being access to raw materials, think critical minerals, lumber, hydroelectricity, things of that nature. So, the rest of the province relies on these raw materials and goods. They rely on this hydroelectricity, and also the revenue generated out of those industries are being put back at the provincial coffers and reinvested in things like social infrastructure, healthcare, affordable housing, childcare, social services. And it's really important that those communities are thriving and that those industries can attract workers, that we can keep generating that revenue to pay for all the things that make all British Columbians have livable and healthy communities. Yeah. No, I agree. And I guess kind of doubling on that question and that topic, what do we do to make that happen? Like what does BC need to do to support, I guess, the next generation of energy, resource, and infrastructure projects in these communities? Yeah, well, I think right now there's some sentiment has been changing, and I feel quite excited about the announcements and promises and commitments of investing in things like mining and the LNG and things of that nature. What I think needs to happen is a complementary support to that. It's not just a commitment of major projects, but ensuring that the communities are ready for that investment. Now, is that one-time capital grants, or do we need to start looking at other things like revenue sharing agreements, impact benefit agreements, fair share agreements? There's actually one already in northern BC that exists, but it's not widespread. And I would even, go as far as even considering if some communities can team up, possibly even amalgamate. I know it's a sensitive topic, but there's other places in Canada where rural areas where small towns have amalgamated and annexed industrial lands into their tax base, and they've been able to turn their ship around in terms of generating revenue. So I think, with these new major project investments, here's a time to think, how do we do this differently? And finding ways to capture some of that revenue being generated to reinvest into the community through some sort of agreement. Cool. I like that. Can you share an example of maybe one of these emerging models that, give you hope that, I guess, like Indigenous-led utilities or regional resource alliances, like something like that like has worked and you've seen? Yeah, one that I'm quite familiar with is in Northwest BC is a consortium of 21 local governments that form what's called the Resource Benefits Alliance, the RBA. And these communities have come together basically to advocate to capture some of the revenue being generated out of things like the pipeline and port expansion, LNG, wind farms, things of that nature. Really demonstrated leadership. You think about 21 local governments, each of them having CAOs and mayors and staff, but all working together, recognizing that, hey, we have a once in a generation opportunity to have a collective voice. And I think what made them successful is it wasn't just one or two of the communities, as they all came together at scale. And they put together a business case demonstrating their needs, collecting that evidence and saying, hey, this is what we need in order to support those industries. And they had a really good process in terms of getting in front of the Premier and the Minister of Finance and others saying, hey, we're down to support industry, but help us help you, and we need money to do that. So they haven't got, I think, all of the capital dollars that they really need to be investment ready, but they have had, I think it was last year, they got some substantial capital funding to support them in that effort.
I mean, it really makes sense, like seeing, rather than getting 14 proposals sent to you from smaller communities and you're trying to choose, if you come together as one and you have a lot more of a stronger case, I think then that this is something that they need. So cool. How can planning shift from being purely, I guess we've talked a lot about this industry driven company towns, to, I guess, a more community focused planning in these areas? Does that make sense?
Not yet. Not really. What, can you reframe it?
You know what? Maybe we'll skip that one.
Okay.
If you could send one message to policymakers or investors about the future of rural BC, what would it be? You can think about it.
Yeah. Well, I think that policymakers, decision makers, I think they need to really look at new mechanisms to reinvest back into these communities. If they want industry to be successful, and really the success is not just for the quality of life of these small towns, it's really for the overall prosperity of all British Columbians. If we want to move in that direction, we really need to find ways to make these communities places people want to live. From amenities to healthcare to fire protection. I mean, right now, the state of things are not in a way that people necessarily want to work there, or you might get an offer of employment to one of these companies, but the rest of the family don't want to, come to. So to invest in these communities can help support those major projects, improve the standard of living, but it's also a way for us to generate the revenue that this province needs, like to get out of the deficit that we're starting to dig a big hole in, and really look at some of the programs that need dollars to do it. So I would say, hey, take a strong look at this and find ways to invest in these communities to make them livable and attractive places to live. Yeah,
and I guess a follow-up question, I guess, on that is same thing, I guess, what happens to BC's economy or BC in general if we do ignore these towns and policymakers don't make these decisions to invest into rural BC? I
think we're going to head to a cliff, to be honest. Mega projects, things like the Site C Dam and things like LNG Canada, that really lifted BC's economy for years for the construction. But those are coming to, they've come to a close, and there's been no other mega projects that have taken their place. They're anticipating, and if you look at the BC Business Council, they forecasted this as well, and they have some really good data on it. But without other industries taking its place, we're going to, I think, continue having a deficit. But what that also means is tightening purse strings. So when we as a province aren't generating that revenue off of mega project development, we spend less. We have less money to spend. So there's less things for things like healthcare, for education, cultural programs, festivals, things of those that starts to get pulled back. All good things that we need. I do think it's promising to see that there is general support and investments and announcements being made, but there is a delayed factor there as well. When you get these announcements, it takes time for approvals and everything else to get into place until you get shovels in the ground and construction up and going. So I think it's going to be tough for a little bit, but seeing that awareness and springing into action is taking place, that we should hopefully be able to turn this around in a better way.
Okay, cool. Now for the listeners, the younger planners, the everyday British Columbians that maybe listen to this and, it really resonates with them. How can they get involved? How can they learn more? How can they help? How can they,
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, a lot of this happens at the local level in terms of, looking at their own circumstances for job opportunities, for accessing university, things of that nature. So if there is a project in your backyard that learn about it, ask questions, go to the open house that's being held at the local school, try to understand what the impacts, both positive and negative, could be in the community, and start weighing those trade-offs and demanding, high standards for whatever that is, to just gain that knowledge and then forming an opinion around that. I think too often what we see in British Columbia is a real disconnect between the knowledge and understanding for people who live in urban areas, especially in Vancouver, maybe even a little bit in Victoria, to the rural areas, and not really understanding that there truly is a relationship and interdependency between the urban and the rural, and that we need each other. But we can't just look at it from one angle. We need to hear all sides of that perspectives, from the environmental stewardship to nations and traditional territory and their rights on the land, to also creating good paying jobs for people to earn a decent living.
Okay, awesome. I think that pretty much wraps up all my questions. If there's somebody that I guess wants to connect with you or learn more about what you're doing personally, do you want to leave behind any sort of do you have any sort of contact info you'd like to leave behind, or website, or?
Yeah, people can contact me at my email address, which is jbasi@cityspaces.ca. And you can also check out my website at cityspaces.ca.
Okay, very cool. I think we have a couple more minutes here.
Yeah,
do you have
bet.
some fun? Would you mind some fun questions? Lighthearted fun questions?
Let's do it.
Yeah, now we've got all this hard-hitting stuff out of the way.
We need to soften it a little bit.
What is one book, podcast, or resource you'd recommend to my listeners?
A book or a podcast?
Or any sort of resource, yeah. And it doesn't have to be related to what we're talking about, just something that maybe you enjoy or resonates with you.
Here's one.
Okay.
So a book I read recently called The End of the World is Just the Beginning.
Okay.
It is a terrific book and a lot of inspiration from that one. What I like about it is it talks about basically global population, and in Western countries really seeing a drop in total population, and what that means for our economy, what we're going to do about it. So I recommend that read. It sounds a bit dark, but there's a lot of humor in it as well. But I think it's eye-opening, and it also just highlights how vulnerable we are as a society. With a lot of us, we don't have a lot of skills when it comes to getting out of without being able to replace people who know how to do things like weld or
I thought about this actually. I was like, if the end of the world happens, who's gonna be left that knows how to build like skyscrapers, design, architecture, all that type of stuff. Anyway,
I recommend that book. It's a good read. It's fine.
What is one purchase you have made under $1,500 that has changed your life in recent memory?
I would say it might have cost me roughly somewhere between $80 to $120.
Perfect.
And it's a sun lamp.
Ah.
Do you know what those are?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. It is so wonderful. So this is a lamp that you have some settings where it wakes you up basically with a reverse dimmer light of a sunrise, and you can put different settings and sounds on it. It is so good. When I wake up, it's not that crazy alarm beeping that will freak you and jolt your anxiety or your adrenaline up. It's just such a nice way to fall asleep. And my colleagues, if they're listening to this, will laugh because I always encourage my colleagues to get consistent and adequate sleep. And I'm a very regiment. I go to bed at the same time, wake up at the same time. But I got to say, this sunrise alarm clock, that was a real game changer.
Yeah, I have one as well.
No way.
I do.
Did it change your life?
I still need to be a bit more regimented, but I do enjoy the wake up feature. It is quite lovely to kind of gently wake up to some sunshine rather than my phone screaming at me.
That's the thing.
Yeah. Do you have a guilty pleasure TV show, music, or activity that you enjoy recently outside of work?
Guilty pleasure. I can't say that I do.
No?
No.
Yeah. All right. Fair enough. And then this is the last question. If you could own any property in Canada for free, where would it be and why?
Any property for free.
And you don't get the dollars back after, so it's only for personal use.
Okay. I'd probably get something in the Caribou, maybe closer to Clinton or 100 Mile House.
Yeah.
I'd get a big property on a little lake, a cabin, and maybe some horses.
Cool. All right. Yeah. Awesome. I don't think that's been a new one. I haven't heard that one before. Awesome. Well, Jada, thank you so much for coming on today. And that's a wrap. Make sure to follow us at Victoria Real Estate Podcast for more behind the scenes, new listings, and local real estate tips. Thank you for listening to Victoria Real Estate Podcast, produced by the City Nest team. We really had some fantastic reviews and we love them. So please leave us a review on Spotify, Apple Music, or wherever you are listening. We also really appreciate you guys sharing the podcast with friends and family. You can reach out to me, Adrian, at 250-464-4122 or at Adrian Real Estate Victoria. Thanks.